The year was 1945, and the world was emerging from the shadow of war, though the certainty of peace had not yet fully settled. The vast expanse of the Kansas prairie stretched out beneath an endless sky, a panorama so immense it seemed to hold echoes of the past. A shimmering heat rose from the unpaved track leading towards the compound, the chain-link perimeter fence resonating with the incessant hum of cicadas. Beyond this barrier, German women stood in silent, sun-baked anticipation, their worn garments stiff with weeks of accumulated grime. Evelyn Carter disembarked from the transport vehicle, her boots sinking into the yielding, powdery soil. The midday sun ignited the brass fastenings on her uniform, causing them to flash like scattered gold. She adjusted her service cap and inhaled deeply, bracing herself against the olfactory assault that greeted her. The scent was a complex blend of perspiration, lingering apprehension, and unwashed bodies. While she had encountered more pungent aromas in the field hospitals near Bastogne, where the stark reality of mortality possessed its own acrid perfume, this particular smell struck her with a different intensity. This was not the scent of cessation from conflict. Rather, it was the residual odor of its aftermath. Corporal Jack Dusty Miller, his face shaded by the brim of his cap, leaned out from the driver's cabin, a broad grin plastered across his features. "Welcome to paradise," he drawled, his Kansas accent as flat and unvaried as the horizon itself. "A population of a few hundred enemy females who likely detest our very existence." Evelyn observed them, her voice lowered. "They don't appear threatening." The women behind the wire maintained an unnerving composure, some shielding their eyes from seeing the glare, others standing so rigidly they might have been sculpted from unyielding stone. "That's precisely what's so peculiar," Dusty responded. "I've encountered prisoners who would spit and curse us. These women merely gaze as if we were spectral apparitions." Evelyn's gaze swept over them, noting their slender wrists, gaunt cheeks, and hair pulled back with a severity that suggested an attempt to impose order on a chaotic existence. In the front rank, a woman cradled an infant against her hip, the child's scalp bare from the ravages of malnutrition. Evelyn's throat tightened. She had been prepared for the casualties of war, for the sick and injured. She had not been prepared for their quiet dignity. Captain Sam Richter approached from the administrative building, a clipboard tucked beneath his arm. He was a man of considerable height, with a strong jawline, and the weary eyes of one who had logged an excessive number of reports concerning provisions, grievances, and fatalities. "Carter," he stated, offering a brief, almost imperceptible nod. "Your assignment is to ensure these women remain alive and reasonably civil until Washington determines their fate. We have no need for martyrs, nor for disturbances, and certainly no tolerance for outbreaks of typhus." "Understood, sir," she replied. He presented her with a document, a roster of names, ages, and medical conditions, a starkly catalogued representation of humanity reduced to ink. Some of these women had been apprehended in France, others in Italy. A few claimed to have been mere consorts to their husbands, not combatants. Regardless, their status was now fixed. "Ours," Evelyn repeated, her eyes fixed on the paper. The word felt alien. These women were not enemies in the way a bullet was an enemy. They were the flotsam and jetsam of war, deposited here like debris following a deluge. Dusty nudged her arm. "Fancy meeting the local residents?" The imposing gates creaked open, and Evelyn stepped across the threshold. The assembled women shifted, creating a narrow path for her passage, their faces impassive. She felt the weight of their collective gaze settle upon her like stones in her pockets. From the throng, a voice arose, speaking a heavily accented German. Evelyn turned to see a tall woman with ash-blonde hair severely pulled back beneath a headscarf. Her blue eyes were sharp, yet devoid of animosity, exhibiting only the reserved politeness of someone trained to uphold decorum, even in adverse circumstances. "I attended," Evelyn replied cautiously. "A little." The woman inclined her head. "I am Annalise Bauer," she announced in clear English. "I was an educator prior to all of this." Her hand made a small, encompassing gesture, as if to encompass the entirety of the war, the surrender, and the subsequent captivity within a single movement. Evelyn nodded. "I am here to assist," she stated, though the words sounded feeble against the oppressive heat. "Assist," Annalise echoed, tasting the syllable as if it held a hidden treachery. She exchanged a meaningful glance with another woman, younger and clad in a skirt so tattered it barely reached her knees. The girl clutched the hem as if to prevent its complete disintegration. Evelyn followed her gaze to the camp's water receptacles, dusty and half-empty. She envisioned the daily reality of life, without soap, without clean attire, without anything to foster a sense of humanity. She turned to Captain Richter. "They require provisions, soap, garments, something." He replied, making a note on his clipboard. "We have substantial reserves of Red Cross supplies at the depot. They've been awaiting someone to organize them. I suppose that task falls to you." By late afternoon, Evelyn and Dusty had erected a makeshift distribution point near the entrance. Laid out on a table were bars of soap, individually wrapped in thin brown paper, and stacks of simple cotton skirts in muted army shades. The women congregated in a hesitant semicircle, their eyes flickering between the offered items and Evelyn's face. "Please approach one at a time," Evelyn called out gently. "There is sufficient for everyone." No one moved. The silence extended, becoming so profound it felt as though the sky itself might fracture under its intensity. Finally, Annalise stepped forward, extending her hands, palms upward, in a gesture akin to a communicant receiving a sacrament. Evelyn placed a bar of soap in her left hand and a folded skirt in her right. For a moment, Annalise remained still. Then, a tremor ran through her shoulders. She lifted the soap to her face and inhaled deeply, tears tracing paths through the dust on her cheeks. She murmured something in German, too softly for Evelyn to discern, then turned and nodded to the others. The line began to advance. One by one, the women approached, each receiving soap, a skirt, or both, their hands trembling. Some offered shy smiles, others simply stared, overwhelmed by the suddenness of this small act of compassion. Hilda Weber, the youngest among them, let out a delighted laugh upon discovering the ample pockets of the skirts. "For bread," she declared in hesitant English, patting the pocket as if it contained a hidden treasure. Even Dusty fell silent, his habitual smirk dissolving. "Well, I'll be," he muttered. Never figured handing out laundry supplies would bring folks to tears. As the sun descended, a subtle transformation occurred within the camp, lending it an almost festive atmosphere. Women gathered at the water barrels, diligently scrubbing away the ingrained grime and wringing out their damp hair. Their former rags were hung on the fence like emblems of surrender, and they donned the new skirts. The fabric hung with a stiff newness, but their bearing altered, their backs straightened, their heads lifted, as if dignity itself had been woven into the very seams. Evelyn observed them, a peculiar warmth spreading through her chest. She thought of her brother, Daniel, interred somewhere in Belgium, and wondered what his perspective would be on her tending to the enemy. Perhaps this, she mused, was the very essence of what he had fought for. Not retribution, but a world where compassion still held sway. As twilight deepened, a melodic sound drifted across the camp, beginning as a soft murmur and gradually strengthening as voices joined in a hymn Evelyn did not recognize. The melody ascended towards the darkening heavens, mingling with the fragrance of soap and damp earth. Dusty, perched on the hood of the truck, his hat tilted back, remarked, "Well, Carter, it appears you've initiated something significant." "Perhaps," she replied. Annalise approached, her new skirt brushing against her calves. "We are grateful," she stated formally. Then, after a brief pause, she added in German, "You have restored our faces to us." Evelyn felt the weight of her words settle deeply within her. She had anticipated animosity, perhaps even outright hostility. She had not expected gratitude. Night descended, bringing with it a sudden, welcome coolness. The women retreated to their barracks, their demeanor now quieter, as if hesitant to disturb the ethereal spell that had been cast. Evelyn remained by the gate, her gaze fixed on the nascent stars emerging in the deepening sky. Somewhere in the darkness, an infant began to cry, not with the faint, dry lament of hunger, but with a more robust, resonant sound. It sounded, Evelyn thought, like the resurgence of life. Captain Richter materialized beside her, igniting a cigarette. "You accomplished commendable work today," he said gruffly. "However, do not become too complacent. Orders could arrive at any moment, stipulating repatriation transfers. It's entirely possible they could dispatch half of them to Texas by tomorrow." Evelyn nodded, a hollow sensation manifesting in her stomach. She had barely begun to learn their names. "Regardless," he continued, flicking ash into the dust, "Washington is not concerned with soap and skirts. Their priority is maintaining order." He turned and walked away, leaving behind a faint wisp of smoke. Evelyn looked back towards the fence, observing the skirts fluttering like pale banners in the gentle breeze. Tomorrow, she would meticulously inventory the provisions, attend to the sick, and establish the routine of care. But tonight, she stood motionless, allowing the nocturnal wind to wash over her, experiencing, for the first time since the war's conclusion, the nascent stirrings of something fragile and unfinished. From a distant barrack, a solitary musical note emerged, clear as glass, hanging in the air before abruptly ceasing, as if consumed by the encroaching darkness. Evelyn shivered, sensing an imminent shift. She felt it deep within her bones, and when it arrived, it would irrevocably alter everything. The summer dawns arrived early in Kansas, filled with light, heat, and the earthy aroma of dry grass. By the first hint of daylight, the camp began to stir, rustles of movement emanating from the barracks, hushed murmurs in German, and the clatter of tin cups. Evelyn Carter stood by the water barrel, her sleeves rolled up, soap suds cascading down her wrists as she rinsed her hands. The women had formed a line before sunrise, eager for their turn to attend to their ablutions. The atmosphere hummed with quiet anticipation, as though the very act of scrubbing away the accumulated dirt could somehow expunge the preceding 4 years. Annalise Bauer was the first to emerge from the barrack, her new skirt hanging neatly, despite the pervasive dust of the camp. She had washed her hair and braided it into 2 plaits that gleamed like spun gold in the morning light. She resembled a woman stepping forth from a vision of normalcy. "You look much improved," Evelyn remarked, handing her a clean cloth. Annalise nodded, a fleeting shadow of pride crossing her features. "It feels different. We feel less shame now." Evelyn noted the use of the plural pronoun. We, not I, not me. A collective sense of dignity had been rekindled overnight, and Evelyn found herself astonished by the swiftness with which the women had transformed from silent phantoms into something palpably more alive. Soon, the others joined, their skirts rustling like a field of wheat swaying in the breeze. Hilda Weber emitted a clear, unrestrained laugh when the cold water splashed her face, a sound so youthful and pure that a few women in proximity offered smiles despite themselves. Sister Margot Clean stood patiently at the rear of the line, her hands clasped. When her turn arrived, she watched with slow reverence, as if witnessing a sacred rite. By mid-morning, the camp carried a faint, clean scent of soap and damp cotton. The women had draped their discarded rags on the wire fence, where they fluttered like vanquished banners. Dusty strolled past, balancing a crate of canned provisions on his shoulder, and paused to survey the scene. "Well, LB," he declared, "looks like we've got ourselves a ladies' laundry social out here." Evelyn shot him a sharp look, but a few of the women smiled, catching the humor, even if the full nuance of his words eluded them. Dusty's grin widened. "Be careful, Carter. At this rate, they'll be organizing a fashion exhibition." "They deserve this," Evelyn stated quietly. He sobered. "Yeah, I suppose they do." After breakfast, Evelyn gathered a select group of women to instruct them on basic sanitation practices, including methods for boiling water and effective scrubbing techniques for the barrack floors. Annalise served as translator, her voice regaining its crisp, authoritative tone as she conveyed Evelyn's instructions into German. The others listened intently, nodding in agreement, now eager students. Once the tasks were completed, they lingered in the yard, forming informal circles on the ground. Someone began humming a lullaby, and soon additional voices joined in, weaving the melody through the warm air. Evelyn felt the resonance of the music seep into her very being. Music had been conspicuously absent from this place, and its return was akin to that of a long-lost avian visitor. However, not all was serene. That afternoon, a dispute erupted near the supply shed. 2 women engaged in a dusty scuffle, their shouts rapid-fire German. A bar of soap was clutched tightly between them. Others gathered, some cheering, others jeering, until Evelyn and Dusty intervened. "Hey, break it up!" Dusty commanded, separating the combatants. Evelyn knelt between them, her heart pounding. "What happened?" Annalise stepped forward, offering a concise explanation. The smaller woman, Erica, had pilfered a second bar of soap from Marta's allocated bundle. Soap had rapidly acquired immense value overnight, becoming a commodity worth fighting for. Evelyn met Erica's hollow gaze and perceived not malice, but sheer desperation. "You will all have sufficient," she stated firmly, "but not if you resort to quarreling amongst yourselves." For a moment, an absolute stillness descended. Then Marta relinquished the bar, dropping it into the dust, her chin trembling. Evelyn retrieved it, brushed it clean, and placed it back into Erica's hand. "Keep it," she instructed. "There will be more tomorrow." Annalise frowned. "If you demonstrate excessive kindness, they will exploit your generosity." "Perhaps," Evelyn conceded. "But today, I would prefer they recall compassion over punishment." That evening, as the crickets commenced their nocturnal chorus, Evelyn sat outside the infirmary, engaged in composing a letter she would never dispatch. "Daniel," she addressed her brother, "I wish you could witness them. They are not the adversaries I had envisioned. They are weary, resilient women who simply yearn to feel clean once more. If this constitutes treason, then I am undoubtedly guilty, yet it feels like the only undertaking of true worth." Suddenly, Russell's voice interrupted her thoughts, causing her to glance up. Margot stood a few feet away, her hands clasped. "I apologize for the intrusion," she said softly. "Some of the women are unable to sleep. The children are crying." Evelyn closed her notebook and stood. "Let's see what we can do." Inside the barrack, the air was thick with heat. Several children whimpered restlessly. Evelyn mixed powdered milk with water, distributing tin cups among them. Hilda cradled a small boy and began humming the same melody from earlier. Gradually, the children quieted, their eyelids growing heavy. When she stepped back outside, the moon was high, casting a silvery luminescence upon the fence. Annalise approached her, her arms crossed. "You instill hope in them," she remarked, almost accusingly. "Is that detrimental?" Evelyn inquired. "It is perilous," Annalise responded. "Hope can shatter a person if it proves to be illusory." "I am not here to deceive you," Evelyn replied. "But I cannot stand idly by and witness your suffering when I possess the means to alleviate it." Annalise's expression softened perceptibly. "I was an educator. I assured my students that the world was inherently good and just. Then the bombs began to fall. They questioned if I had misled them. I still lack a definitive answer." Evelyn, too, found herself without a ready response to such profound questions. Days unfolded, and the camp underwent a palpable transformation. The instances of shouting and despair diminished. The women moved with a newfound vigor, diligently sweeping floors, mending garments, and even cultivating a small row of beans adjacent to the fence. Dusty jestingly remarked that they would soon possess a victory garden. "Perhaps we shall even hold a harvest celebration," he proposed, tipping his hat. Even Captain Richter took notice. "Carter," he commented one evening, "I confess I do not fully comprehend your methods, but I urge you to persist. The number of complaints and altercations has decreased. Washington finds such progress commendable. However, this progress was fragile. One afternoon, a truck arrived from the depot carrying fewer crates than anticipated. The food rations had been reduced. There was insufficient meat to provide for everyone." Evelyn stood at the distribution table, her heart pounding as the women lined up. She dispensed smaller portions, stretching the meager supply as far as possible. Nevertheless, a palpable tension began to rise, reminiscent of the heat preceding a storm. Some women muttered discontentedly under their breath. "They believe we are intentionally depriving them," Annalise warned discreetly. "I shall requisition additional supplies," Evelyn assured her. That night, someone etched words into the dirt outside the barrack. "When do we go home?" Evelyn stared at the message, illuminated by lantern light, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. She had no answer. She was uncertain whether the women would be repatriated soon or detained for many months. The following morning, she found Margot kneeling in prayer beside the fence, her fingers moving over an unseen rosary. "You pray for them," Evelyn observed. "For them," Margot confirmed. "And for you," Evelyn added with a faint smile. "Pray for Washington to expedite matters." By the week's end, the camp seemed to be holding its breath. The women were cleaner, healthier, yet also demonstrably more restless. The soap had washed away more than just dirt. It had scrubbed away the emotional numbness that had kept them quiescent. Then a letter arrived. A courier delivered it to Captain Richter, who read it, grunted, and strode towards the yard where Evelyn was organizing bandages. "Orders from Washington," he announced. "A significant change is imminent." The women sensed something before Evelyn could relay the information. They gathered near the fence, their voices rising in a collective murmur. Annalise's eyes searched Evelyn's face. "What is it?" she demanded. Evelyn swallowed hard. "I do not know yet," she replied, but I shall ascertain." She could feel the entire camp leaning towards her, as if her forthcoming words held the power to tip them towards either hope or despair. The soap, the skirts, the singing. These had been sufficient for a time, but now a far greater development loomed, one capable of shattering the fragile edifice they had painstakingly constructed. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Evelyn walked back towards the office, the letter crumpled tightly in her fist. Behind her, the women waited, their skirts snapping in the wind like a row of defiant flags. Whatever decision Washington had made, it was destined to alter everything. The missive from Washington rested upon Captain Richter's desk like a coiled serpent, its seal already breached, its contents perused and reread until the paper had softened at the creases. Evelyn Carter stood before him, her cap held demurely in her hand, as he drummed his fingers rhythmically on the polished wood. "They are returning some of the women," he finally stated. "Repatriation directives. Not all of them, only the initial contingent. The remainder will remain here until further instructions are issued." Evelyn's stomach constricted. "How many?" "50, he replied, his jaw working as if the number left a bitter residue. "Specific names are attached. Transportation is scheduled for the end of the month." She accepted the document, her eyes scanning the precisely typed roster. Names she had come to recognize. Marta Erica, a mother of twins, two sisters who habitually braided each other's hair each evening. "Do they know yet?" she inquired. "Not presently. And I prefer to maintain that state of ignorance until we have adequately organized matters. You anticipate a negative reaction? I believe any news can destabilize this entire establishment if disseminated prematurely." He exhaled a plume of smoke towards the ceiling. "I require tranquility. You have performed admirably in maintaining order here, Carter. Do not allow it to disintegrate now." However, news was an independent entity within the camp. By evening, whispers had begun to circulate. Someone had glimpsed the letter. Someone had overheard the courier mention trains. The German word Heimkehr, meaning homecoming, drifted through the air like airborne pollen, permeating every conversation. Evelyn felt its palpable presence the following morning as she traversed the yard. The women's eyes followed her with an intensified scrutiny, as if she carried answers meticulously stitched into the fabric of her uniform. Annalise approached her near the water barrel, her voice low yet urgent. "There is talk," she stated. "They say some of us will be sent home." Evelyn hesitated. She could offer a falsehood, but something in Annalise's gaze compelled her to opt for candor. "Yes," she said simply. The entire camp seemed to inhale collectively. By midday, the news had disseminated universally. Excitement and apprehension became inextricably intertwined, like threads in a hastily woven tapestry. Some women wept tears of joy. Others clutched their children, their hearts consumed by terror regarding the uncertain reception awaiting them in a homeland ravaged by bombardment. That night, as lanterns flickered within the barracks, Evelyn discovered Margot seated on the steps, her Bible open upon her lap. "They are filled with fear," Margot stated softly. "Some yearn for departure, while others express a preference for remaining. They have inquired of me which course aligns with God's will. I confess I do not know." Evelyn sat beside her. The night air carried the scent of dry grass and laundry left too long in the heat. "What is your desire?" she asked. "I wish for them to possess the agency of choice," Margot replied. "However, the luxury of choices is reserved for those who are free." In the ensuing days, the camp's atmosphere shifted like an unpredictable weather pattern. Moments of song and laughter were punctuated by altercations, sharp words, and sudden outbursts. One woman accused another of attempting to bribe the American personnel to secure a place on the departure list. Hilda wept inconsolably upon discovering that she and her elder sister were to be separated, one slated for transport, the other not. Dusty endeavored to lighten the mood by producing a baseball and demonstrating to the younger women the proper technique for throwing. "See," he explained, tossing the ball into the dusty yard. "You just wind up and let it fly." Initially, the women erupted in laughter, their throws wildly inaccurate, the ball frequently rolling beneath the fence. Soon, however, they were running, their skirts billowing, their hair becoming dislodged. Even Annalise managed a fleeting smile as she caught the ball with surprising dexterity. For a brief hour, the camp bore a striking resemblance to a spirited schoolyard. Yet, as evening approached, the underlying tension returned with even greater intensity. One afternoon, a jeep arrived, carrying a journalist clad in a khaki jacket and sporting round spectacles. He introduced himself as Tom Ellison, a war correspondent for a Chicago publication, stating his intention to compose a human interest narrative concerning the enemy women adapting to life in America. Evelyn's jaw tightened. "These individuals are not specimens for display," she countered. "The public is curious about the fate of prisoners following the conclusion of hostilities," he responded with an upbeat tone. "A favorable report could serve to demonstrate that we are not barbarians." He ambled through the compound, a notepad in his grasp, capturing details with rapid pen strokes. The garments airing on the clothesline, the youngsters engaged in games amidst the dust, the communal singing as evening descended. He even attempted to converse with Annalise, who responded in terse English. "What will your publication convey?" she inquired. "That your circumstances are improving," he stated, a smile suggesting this resolved all issues. Her gaze drifted past him toward Evelyn. "We are adapting," she said. "However, we have not found tranquility." That evening, Evelyn discovered her near the perimeter, gazing toward the distant horizon. "Do you wish to return to your homeland?" Evelyn inquired. Annalise remained silent for a considerable duration. "Home?" she finally articulated. "Has the educational establishment been reduced to ashes? Are my parents deceased, my brother unaccounted for? I question if my home even persists." She turned, her countenance pallid in the lunar glow. "What is one to do when the place one belongs to ceases to exist?" Evelyn's throat tightened. "One constructs a new space," she replied, though her voice sounded fragile, even to her own ears. Several days unfolded with a disquieting regularity. The scheduled departure date approached, and the women's sentiments escalated like a river straining against its banks. Some meticulously prepared, plaiting their hair, repairing their dresses, composing correspondence they hoped to dispatch. Others retreated, sullen, as if anticipating chastisement. On the morning designated for the selection, Havlin stood by the entrance as RTOR, vocalized the roster of names. Each designation resonated like a chime throughout the encampment. Marta, Erica, Hilda's sibling. A wave of distress surged through the assembled group. Upon completion of the recitation, the designated women segregated themselves, a disparate collective of 50 individuals, their countenances a complex mixture of relief and sorrow. The remainder observed in silence, their fists clenched. That night, no singing was heard. The compound lay shrouded in a profound quietude, punctuated only by the occasional cough or the distressed cry of someone unsettled. Evelyn occupied a step of the medical facility, her gaze fixed on the heavens. The stars appeared detached, dispersed across the expanse of Kansas night. Dusty joined her, offering a tin mug of weak coffee. "A challenging period," he remarked. "They believe this marks the conclusion," she stated. "Does it not?" "For some, perhaps. For others, it is merely another prolonged period of anticipation." She rubbed her eyes. "And I am incapable of offering them any assurance of improvement." He remained silent for a brief interval, then articulated, "Have you ever considered that we are merely rectifying the aftermath, Carter?" As if we were handed a broom after the festivities have concluded, she emitted a weary chuckle. "Perhaps, but someone must undertake the sweeping." 2 nights prior to the planned relocation, a tempest swept across the aircraft field. The wind howled, hurling dust against the temporary dwellings, causing the windows to rattle. Evelyn lay awake, attentive to the hushed conversations of the women in the darkness. At one juncture, she perceived singing, soft, defiant, rising above the gale. When daylight arrived, the encampment was dusted with a fine layer of mud. The women emerged, their dresses damp, their hair disheveled, yet a peculiar luminescence resided in their eyes, as if they had collectively endured a severe ordeal. On the day of departure, the transport vehicle arrived prematurely, its engine emitting a guttural sound akin to an impatient predator. The selected women formed a line, clutching modest parcels of their possessions. Hilda clung to her sister until Annalise gently separated them. Evelyn walked alongside them as they boarded, extending whatever meager solace she could. She observed both hope and apprehension etched onto each visage. When the vehicle rumbled away, a plume of dust trailed in its wake. The women remaining stood gazing long after it had disappeared from view. Then someone whispered, "When will our turn arrive?" No response was offered. That evening, Evelyn convened the remaining women near the enclosure. "Further directives will be issued. she announced, her voice firm. "But until then, we persist in living. We persist in our labor. You have elevated this place beyond its previous state. Do not cease now." Annalise regarded her for a considerable moment, then inclined her head. "We shall endeavor," she confirmed. Yet, as night descended, Evelyn could not dispel the sensation that a transformation had occurred in the atmosphere. The compound was excessively tranquil, the sort of quietude that presages a storm. She stood by the gate well after the illumination had been extinguished, the prairie wind tugging at her hair. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled once more, a low, foreboding sound. When the initial heavy raindrops struck the earth, she did not move. The tempest was returning, and this time she harbored the dreadful premonition that it would not be content with merely moistening the terrain. The downpour commenced shortly past midnight. It began with wind, prolonged, mournful sighs sweeping across the plains of Kansas. Subsequently, the rain descended with ferocity, hammering the rooftops until they thrummed like marching formations. Evelyn Carter awoke to the clamor of shutters banging and the shouts of women in the darkness. She snatched her lantern and dashed into the courtyard, the rain instantly drenching her uniform. The encampment was in disarray. Water flowed rapidly, transforming the yard into a shallow torrent. Dresses clung to slender limbs as women hurried to extricate children from the rising mire. The wind seized the clothesline and tore it loose, garments whirling away into the night like startled avians. "Get everyone indoors!" Captain Richter bellowed from the doorway of the administrative office, his cap already plastered to his head. "They will perish in there!" Evelyn shouted back, gesturing towards the low-lying barracks where water was already breaching the entrances. He swore under his breath, then turned to Dusty. "Open the supply shed. Secure sandbags." Dusty was already in motion, his outline dissolving into sheets of rain. Evelyn waded toward the closest barrack and pushed inside. The air was heavy with apprehension and moisture. A baby wailed. A woman clutched a string of beads so tightly that the pearls dug into her palms. "Up!" Evelyn commanded, signaling towards the exit. "Proceed to the mess hall. It is elevated ground." Annalise emerged from the shadows, her hair unbound and plastered to her face. "I will assist," she stated, her voice sharp with authority. She turned to the others, issuing directives in German. The women complied, forming a chain to pass containers, lift belongings, and gather whatever could be salvaged. They poured out into the tempest, the rain stinging their faces. Evelyn seized a child from the grasp of a faltering mother and balanced her on her hip. The doors of the mess hall loomed through the deluge like a maritime beacon. Within, the hall carried the scent of damp timber and rising panic, but it remained dry. They packed the women shoulder to shoulder, water dripping from their garments. Hilda sat against the wall, her knees drawn up, her wide eyes fixed on the doorway as if it might vanish. Outside, Dusty and a contingent of soldiers battled the floodwaters with sandbags, shoveling mud in a futile effort. "We cannot hold it much longer," he yelled above the din. "We must!" Evelyn called back. A powerful gust of wind ripped the gate from its fixtures with a metallic shriek. Barbed wire sagged, then yielded completely, the entire section succumbing to the immense force. The women gasped as if the sound had inflicted an internal wound. Liberty lay just beyond, a dark expanse glistening with rain. For a harrowing instant, Evelyn anticipated they would flee. She perceived it in their gazes, panic, temptation, the sudden recollection of life beyond the confines. Annalise stepped forward, positioning herself in the entryway. "No one departs," she declared in German, her voice as hard as tempered steel. "Should you leave, you will be pursued. Remain here, and we shall navigate this night collectively." The women hesitated, then gradually sank back onto the benches. The enchantment of the breached fence dissolved under her command. Lightning rent the sky, a blinding white flash. In that illumination, Evelyn observed Ardor standing near the collapsed gateway, his uniform caked in mud, issuing urgent commands to the men. They toiled with relentless energy, stacking barriers, diverting water, striving to preserve what they could. A sudden cry pierced the downpour. One of the children had inadvertently slipped back outside, pursuing a piece of floating debris. Evelyn acted instinctively. She ran with all her might, her boots sinking deeply into the mire as she reached the edge of the inundated courtyard. The child was already submerged up to their waist, struggling against the current. She plunged into the frigid water, which rose over her thighs. Her fingers clasped the child's arm just as her footing faltered. The current wrenched her sideways, pulling them both beneath the surface. For a terrifying moment, only darkness prevailed, the taste of mud in her mouth, the roar of water in her ears. Strong hands grasped her, hauling her upwards. She coughed, gasping for air, clinging to the child who sobbed against her shoulder. Margot stood over her, drenched but composed, as if she had anticipated this precise juncture. "Inside," Margot stated simply, and assisted them back to the mess hall. Evelyn collapsed onto the wooden floor, trembling as the women gathered around, tending to the child, wrapping her in spare fabric. "Thank you," Evelyn whispered to Margot. Margot merely made the sign of the cross. "We are all in God's hands this night." The storm continued to rage, but a palpable shift had occurred. The women no longer cowered. They moved with a newfound purpose, reinforcing the doorway with crates, sopping up water with rags, offering comfort to the children. Annalise moved amongst them like a conductor guiding an orchestra, her voice clear above the thunder. Hours elapsed. The wind began to subside, the rain easing into a steady drizzle. Dawn broke, gray and weak, revealing the extent of the damage. The yard was a swamp, the fence torn asunder, the supply shed partially collapsed. However, no lives had been lost. The women emerged slowly, blinking in the diffused light. Hilda was the first to laugh, splashing barefoot through a puddle. Others followed, cleansing their faces, their skirts, their arms. The air carried the scent of wet earth and soap, where the bars had melted in the rain. Evelyn stood in the yard, utterly exhausted, mud streaking her uniform, observing as the women began to hang their skirts on the fallen fence to dry. The sight impacted her with unexpected intensity. Skirts fluttered like banners, not of defeat, but of resilience. Captain R.T.O.R. approached, his expression somber, yet tinged with respect. "You maintained their unity," he stated quietly. "Had they succumbed to panic, we would have experienced a stampede." "I did not achieve this solely," she replied, glancing at Annalise, who was wringing out her hair with an air of grim satisfaction. R.T.O.R. nodded. "Washington will be apprised of this. It may even expedite the subsequent relocation. Following last night's events, they will desire this compound cleared." The words struck Evelyn with greater force than she had anticipated. She gazed at the women, muddy, softly laughing, alive, and felt a profound ache in her chest. They had weathered the night together, evolved into something beyond captor and captive, and soon they would depart. That evening, as the sun pierced through the clouds, it bathed the compound in a golden hue. The women congregated in the yard, humming softly, their voices rising with the light. Evelyn sat on the steps of the mess hall, listening. Dusty joined her, wiping mud from his hands. "Remarkable," he commented. "The place almost appears beautiful now." "It does," Evelyn affirmed. Annalise approached, her skirt still damp but clean, her chin held high. "You preserved us," she told Evelyn. "No," Evelyn corrected. "We preserved each other." Annalise considered this, then nodded once. "When we return home," she stated, "I shall relay that we were treated with dignity." Evelyn felt her throat constrict. "That is all that I could have wished for." As twilight descended, Evelyn walked to the breached section of the fence. A skirt still hung there, fluttering in the evening breeze. She reached out, touching the damp fabric, feeling its weight. The storm had scoured the compound raw, but it had also cleansed it. The women would depart shortly, but this night would endure, a quiet, indelible imprint on all of them. Somewhere behind her, someone began to sing, not a hymn of sorrow, but a song of homecoming. The others joined in, their voices intertwining in the air. The melody carried beyond the compound, over the sodden fields, as if summoning the world to bear witness. Evelyn stood motionless, her hand resting on the fence. For the first time since the war commenced, she experienced something that was neither triumph nor defeat, but something more stable, more genuine. "Peace," she mused. "This is what peace feels like." The song swelled, filling the night, and for a fleeting moment, it seemed the very stars themselves bent lower to listen.